In the 1800s, there was something called the Temperance Movement. For the most part, the Temperance Movement was just a bunch of old white dudes who believed that drinking alcohol wasn't so great for the health. While the Temperance Movement guys weren't all right, they certainly were not all wrong. Alcohol in excess can give your body some really bad problems later in life. However, there was a particular member of that movement who was even more extreme than the others. His name was Sylvester Graham. And he believed meat was the reason that people masturbated and that masturbation caused epilepsy, headaches, early death, blindness, and insanity. To counter the sickening effect of meat, his followers invented what is today known as the graham cracker. So basically, the graham cracker was invented to stop you from thinking about sex. Really? Yes, really. This is Munchable, and today we'll be looking at how the followers of Sylvester Graham invented the graham cracker to stop people from masturbating. Imagine you're a doctor. Imagine someone comes into your hospital and says to you, "Hey doctor, I've been having a lot of headaches. What do you think could be the problem, and how do you think I could solve it?" Now imagine your question being, "Are you sexually active?" The patient is an attractive adult, so yeah, they've been sexually active, so they say, "Yes, doc, I'm sexually active. What does that got to do with anything?" Now imagine smiling a wry smile and saying, "That must be it. It's the sex and carnal desires that you've had that are ruining the chemical imbalances in your head and giving you headaches. In fact, mister, if you don't stop thinking so much about sex soon, you may very well run mad and go blind and then die at the ripe old age of 25. That would be absolutely bonkers, wouldn't it? Of course it would. But this was the state of mind of Sylvester Graham when he founded his Grahamism movement. But let's go back a little bit. Who is Sylvester Graham and why was he an incredibly weird fellow? To answer this question, we'd have to go back in time. What time are we talking about? We're talking about the 1700s, of course. In 1794, Sylvester Graham was born. His father died 2 years later, and Sylvester spent the rest of his childhood moving from the house of one relative to another. One of his relatives ran a tavern where Sylvester had his first job. And his experience with this job was one of the reasons he came to utterly hate alcohol. He saw the full extent of drunkenness in all its glory and said to himself, "Nope, I'm definitely never doing that." And he never looked back. Sylvester later left the tavern and actually became a minister. He got married in his 20s and by all accounts was on his way to having a pretty normal life. How normal? Well, what do you think normal in the 1700s was? But let's move on. As a clergyman, Sylvester began to move with doctors and members of the Philadelphia Temperance Movement. In that company, he got convinced to convert to vegetarianism as he came to believe that meat was probably just as bad as alcohol. What that means is that Sylvester Graham came to believe that meat was just as terrible as alcohol. You may be wondering where he got this idea from, and we are all wondering too. What we know, though, is that his view was at least partially informed by the book Treatise on Physiology by Francois-Joseph Victor Broussais. This book was published in Philadelphia in 1826, and it claimed that health was mostly a function of what you ate. Therefore, if you eat weird stuff, or generally any kind of stuff, you're guaranteed to feel some kind of way because of that stuff. In today's world, that belief would be just bonkers. Hot dogs don't influence personalities, and what we eat generally has little effect on what we think. But in the 1800s, this sort of idea was popularized and even welcomed. However, that's not the only thing that served to make Sylvester Graham rather extraordinary. He belonged to the Temperance Movement, that movement that absolutely hated alcohol. And the movement believed that things like physical pleasure, stimulation, and pleasing stuff in general were to be viewed with healthy suspicion. After all, alcohol was said to be pleasurable and it led to all sorts of things. Thus, members of the movement didn't look very kindly on pleasurable things, as it were. Since members of this movement were mostly preachers and whatnot, they believed the true pleasure should be in spiritual things, like reading the Bible, praying to God, pious, stuff like that. Of course, in every movement, there are moderates that are fundamentalists. The moderates of the temperance movement just wanted to do away with alcohol, that's all. But the fundamentalists, they had more fundamentalist ideas, and Sylvester Graham happily belonged to that group. But even in this group, Sylvester was quickly proving to be an outlier. For one, he began to believe that people were created only to eat plants and fruits, just like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And no, that's not a lie, that's what he actually believed. Consequently, he believed that the only reason people got sick in the first place was that they'd left this vegan lifestyle that God himself ordained behind. Additionally, Sylvester believed that this vegan lifestyle would stop people from thinking about sin. Yes, you heard that right, Sylvester Graham believed that eating broccoli would stop you from thinking impure thoughts, like stealing your neighbor's cattle, or getting lube and rubbing it on your genitals. And still, yes, that was not all. Sylvester Graham didn't just hate meat, he also hated white bread too. Yes, innocent white bread didn't escape the ever-vigilant and forever-piercing sanctimonious vitriol of Sylvester Graham. According to him, white bread made with bleached flour caused a lazy colon. So let's keep track of all the things Sylvester Graham hated. He hated meat, sex, white bread made with bleached flour, sugar, tobacco, masturbation, alcohol, coffee, and all kinds of spices. Why did he hate them? Well, they made you want to whack your mole. Was that a good one? It was. Seriously, it was. You should also know that Sylvester Graham believed that masturbation was the chief cause of illness like blindness, early death, insanity, and literally any other thing that he could think of. But even that's not all. Besides this, you should probably know that the creator of Kellogg's Corn Flakes also had roughly the same theology as Graham. In fact, he was a follower of the ideology of Graham and called himself a Grammite. If you think we're lying, you can check out the video we did on it here. We covered all the juicy bits. You sure will be surprised that Corn Flakes was originally made to stop you from thinking about wanking. Seriously, no jokes. Now, back to Sylvester Graham and his theology. It seemed to Sylvester that he'd found his life's purpose. He was going to dedicate his life to fashioning a diet that kept individuals healthy and pure. His diet was going to consist of bread made at home from flour coarsely ground at home so that it remained wholesome and natural, containing no added spices or other stimulants, and a rigorous lifestyle that included sleeping on hard beds and avoiding warm baths. It was a weird life, to say the least, but it was one that Sylvester was dedicated to. And it was the one that was going to lead to the invention of the graham cracker. In today's world, such a lifestyle would be outrageous. And even though the sensibilities of the 1800s are definitely not the same as today, Sylvester's lifestyle did raise many eyebrows. The medical establishment was outraged. Butchers were flabbergasted, and while some people followed Sylvester's example, everyone else were basically like, this is really odd, Sylvester. Are you sure you're okay? But Sylvester was okay. In fact, he was so okay that he wrote a book about this meat-hating, masturbation-hating, sex-hating, and plant-loving lifestyle. Yeah, it was called On Self-Pollution and was published in 1834. Let's just say the book made a lot of Americans scared about masturbating. I mean, if the choice was between not being blind and an orgasm, you'd probably choose not being blind. Right? 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 You know what? Quickly, tell us in the comments section what you would choose. Would you rather be blind and stop masturbating or having sex? Don't worry, we won't tell anyone about your answer. It's perfectly safe in our comments section. Now, back to Sylvester Graham. In 1832, the cholera pandemic reached New York, and it appeared that people who followed Sylvester Graham's lifestyle choices were unharmed. This made it seem like he was vindicated after all and all was right. And right then, his fame exploded. He began to lecture in New York and Boston and became very popular indeed. As his fame spread, Grahamism became a movement. People began to follow his lifestyle and generally adhere to his teachings. Yes, people began to avoid meat, masturbation, and everything Graham told them to avoid. Unfortunately, at the age of 57, Sylvester Graham died of complications after receiving opium enemas as directed by his doctor. I know what you're thinking. Dead? How? How did he now invent the graham cracker? Well, he didn't. It was his followers who were following his theology and philosophy of Grahamism who who actually invented the biscuit using what they called the Graham flour. And yes, that's a thing, I know what you're thinking. How did he die at age 57 if his theology was right? Well, it would probably serve you to know that his theology wasn't right by any standards. While abstaining from meat and alcohol may have some healthy effects on your body, it's not guaranteed to stop you from dying early. Besides, in the 1800s, dying after 50 wasn't necessarily a terrible thing. Moving on. A few years after the death of Sylvester Graham, his followers hit a gold mine. They'd invented the perfect recipe that would solve all of their problems. They called it Graham flour, and it was the basis of other Graham products like the Graham cracker and Graham bread. Yes, there's a Graham bread. Of course there's a Graham bread. Why wouldn't there be a Graham bread? The Graham flour was basically a type of coarse ground whole wheat flour. It was similar to conventional whole wheat flour in that both are made from the whole grain, but Graham flour is ground more coarsely and is not sifted during milling. To the Grammite, this flour was the ideal flour for making bread and other baked products because it used all the grain in the milling of flour, whatever that means. In any case, the Graham bread was made from this flour and it became very popular indeed. The Graham cracker was made from it as well, and it became extremely popular too. The very first Graham crackers were basically bland. It was stale tasting, harsh to chew, and would probably break your teeth if you tasted it today. And the very first Graham crackers would have pleased Sylvester Graham. It was made of wheat, had no additives, wasn't sweet, and would definitely not make you think of masturbation. However, that all changed when Nabisco bought the Graham cracker brand in the 1890s. Like anyone would expect, the company added loads of sugar and cinnamon to the cracker and changed it forever. They also ensured that Sylvester Graham would be rolling in his grave. Imagine a man who lived all of his life telling people to be weary of meat, sugar, and tobacco, finding out that after his death he literally became the face of a biscuit that was equal parts sugar and flour. I mean, if I were Sylvester Graham, I would definitely do more than roll in my grave. I would somersault, or something. As you know, graham crackers became so popular in America that it became the face of crackers all over the world. In fact, several other firms started to produce their own graham crackers making use of graham flour, and it basically flooded the market. From Philadelphia to the world, baby. And that's it, guys. That's the story of how a man's anti-sex, anti-meat, anti-white bread, and anti-basically fun lifestyle gave rise to the graham cracker. Next time you're eating it, remember not to think impure thoughts. That's the least you can do for old man Sylvester Graham. This snack brand was sent in by a subscriber. If you want us to make a video about your favorite brand, you can just send it to us. Who knows? The next video may be about your brand. This is Munchable. Hope you enjoyed the video. Munch on.